Hello, listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series on large group awareness trainings. In part 1, Dr. John Hunter broke down the history of LGATs, and in this second part, we will dive into John's personal experiences in one of these programs. Here is Dr. John Hunter. Something that stands out to me in what you've just said in regards to your paper that I've read was the information control around the seminars. So you've spoken about how there was this mysterious element to the seminars in your workplace before you attended, these magical sessions, this hidden knowledge, these things that we've seen have such a positive effect on other co-workers that have been through these seminars. We're finally going to get the chance to learn what this is all about, and that's unpacked quite a bit in your research in regards to actually not telling people what happens in the seminars, being told that it's more word of mouth in terms of recruiting people to attend the next load of seminars and workshops instead of publicly advertising all over the place. A lot of the time it's family members, friends that are being encouraged to see you in your manic state and think, wow, I would love to go to one of these things and learn what you have learned or experience what you have experienced because you just look like the best version of yourself.
Exactly. So what they tend to tell participants is don't tell anyone about what actually goes on. And they often say something like, you don't want to ruin the experience for them. I mean, this altruistic like justification for it is always provided. I mean, Margaret Singer kind of wrote about that, and I've just seen it over and over again that is a major sort of thing about it. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent about this because I sometimes confuse people when I speak about this. But one of my articles that I've written about LGATs is called the first rule of large group awareness training, and I've written another article called LGATs and Fight Club: Dissecting a Delusion, because when I told my own psychologist that I seemed to have found a hidden message in Fight Club, she thought that I was delusional. But it turns out that I may be right. I mean, you can read it yourself and figure it out. But
it's like quite meta, isn't it? That she's telling you you're delusional from finding a hidden message in a film that's about somebody that's delusional.
Well, I mean, imagine you're a therapist and someone with bipolar disorder who's experienced psychosis at various points comes to you and tells you something like that. I think it's a fair assumption that is the most likely answer to that's the most likely thing that's kind of going on. But interestingly, the guy who wrote Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk, so he took part in the predecessor to the landmark forum called the Forum in 1989. And there are a number of articles where he kind of says, after doing that, I decided to become a writer. That inspired me to become a writer, etc. So I'll just throw in a couple of things here, and you can edit it out if it sounds too crazy. But so the rules in Fight Club, the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club, and there are a number of rules that are read through right at the beginning. So you don't do this, etc., etc. When you go into a large group awareness training, that is the first thing that they do. They sit you down and you've got to agree to a bunch of rules. You can't talk to people, you can't eat, you have to raise your hand to answer questions in a particular way. And the most important rule is don't tell anyone about what's in the LGAT. You can't, they say you can't take drugs. They discourage you from getting up to use the bathroom. So a lot of them will say, you can get up and leave whenever you want to. If you look at if you run through the evidence from my PhD, you'll see that that's misleading to say that people can just get up and freely walk in and out. So there are a number of rules that people have to agree to. So here are a couple of other parallels just to maybe get people interested if they want to go read this essay. So the major opposition to what's going on is Marla Singer, and I believe that that's representative of Margaret Singer. Edward Norton, he says that he said that Tyler worked as a banquet waiter in the luxurious Pressman Hotel. So Stephen Pressman was the journalist who wrote the biography of Werner Erhard, which is kind of interesting. Werner Erhard's mansion was in Franklin Street in San Francisco. If you look at the first scene of the movie is in Franklin Street. You know, when Edward Norton runs down the road in his boxes, he looks up at a bus shelter and it says Franklin Street on the side. Stuart Emery was the first CEO of Est. And in the one scene, so Edward Norton kind of goes to, he goes to the cops to try and alert them of this group of vandals who are doing all these bad things. And a couple of things flash on the screen before he is confronted by the cops. And one of them is a thing that says Emery Street. So there's a number of these kind of things that are kind of similar. There's the whole idea of threatening a high-ranking official and asking them to not say anything about these groups. The fights themselves involve a period of brutality followed by a euphoria, which is essentially what goes on in LGATs, although the brutality is psychological as opposed to physical. You've got the space monkeys, who are these group of people who are living in a house of like washing pots and pans and cleaning all sorts of things. That was the setup at the Franklin House. It's written about in a number of places. There's a lot of the criticism of LGATs is about the fact that participants end up becoming unpaid employees, who do all the phoning, they do all they're essentially doing a lot of the running of the businesses, and they kind of believe that they're going to be getting free enlightenment from it, which is kind of like what the space monkeys are expecting to get. Yeah, I don't know. There are a couple of things. I mean, for example, to become one of the space monkeys, they have to stand outside. They have to stand outside and they get shouted at and screamed at for 3 days. And if they can stay there for 3 days, then they can come in and start beginning their training as like a member of the organization. So, for example, the Landmark Forum is 3 days long, and you get treated relatively badly, and then you can only start working for the organization. There's that scene with Raymond K. Hessel, the guy that gets pulled out of the convenience store and he gets put on his knees and a gun's put at the back of his head. And Tyler says to him, Raymond, you're going to die. And, he's in so much fear and he's shaking and he's terrified, and then eventually lets him go and he runs off into the night. And Edward Norton says to Brad Pitt, he says, what was the point of that? I feel sick. And Brad Pitt says, imagine how he feels. Tomorrow will be the greatest day of his life. His food will taste much better, etc., etc. Again, that process of stress removal, feeling really great afterwards. In fact, in the Landmark Forum, they've got an exercise called the fear exercise, where the trainer or the leader leads them through a guided visualization process. And if you read the descriptions of it, people are screaming and wailing and crying. And then right at the end, the stress is abruptly removed and replaced with, it's kind of turned into a sort of joke. So the stress is very abruptly removed and people feel really elevated and amazing afterwards. So and I'm kind of just speaking from memory now. I'm pretty sure that the essay is a lot more well put together and eloquent, but going back to the first part, which was, not giving people clear information about what they're going to be getting involved with, that first rule of large group awareness training is don't tell people about what actually happens. And that contributes to the stress as well, because you go in there, uncertainty plays a big role in stress. If you know what's coming up, then it's going to be less stressful. So you can go onto the websites of some of these organizations and they say, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, but they don't tell you about the tone of what goes on. They don't tell you about the actual interaction. So the substantive elements that actually contribute to their technology, in my opinion, are not discussed.
Well, you've convinced me about the similarities between Fight Club and large group awareness training. It seems that there are too many things in that film that are done purposefully. The only real hidden messages that I've tried to look at in Fight Club are around homoeroticism and the male gaze. So I think we've had slightly different interpretations of those films.
Well, I think there can be
film.
more than one thing going on at the same time, you know. So
yeah, absolutely.
Also, and I mean, I think if you've experienced mania before and you've experienced kind of delusional thinking before, when I first sort of picked it up was in 2012. And I've got to kind of have this inner dialogue whenever I start noticing something that seems to be connected. And I had to say, well, there seem to be so many things, but it still seems crazy that nobody would have picked this up. But I guess most people haven't spent as much time looking at LGAT, so it wasn't maybe as easy to see those connections.
Your personal circumstances around a diagnosis gave you some unique insight when you went to this work seminar or a seminar with work in regards to large group awareness training. Are you able to tell us the name of the specific training that you went on?
Yeah, it was called Life Dynamics. So that was the name of the organization. The training was called Gateway. There was a follow-up training called Genesis, and then I believe that there was another follow-up after that, which is very much the LifeSpring model. So if I look at what I went through, it was, I would say the vast majority was LifeSpring, but there were also some exercises taken directly from EST. So it was, and when I say directly, I mean almost identical. I can actually kind of run through some of them. So one of the ones that I think is very clear is the use of a very particular piece of music, which kind of signals the end of particular breaks. So when you have a break, and this is only every 2 or 3 hours, you get a short break. And then when you come back, we were told about a piece of music. It was, you know, the trainer told us exactly how long it was. And it was like, if you're not seated by the end of the break, then, you know, there are consequences. And the piece of music is the theme song to 2001, A Space Odyssey, the Stanley Kubrick film. It's the name of the music, I think it's called also Sprach Zarathustra. And it was used in LifeSpring. It's used in, I know, having reviewed some of the workshops or seminars that are used in the troubled teen industry in the US, that's the song that they're using. So identical. You know, there was something called the trust exercise, which I know they used in LifeSpring. I know that they use that in some of the workshops in the troubled teen industry. There was something called the lifeboat exercise, again in LifeSpring in the troubled teen industry. We had something called the matchstick exercise, which is kind of a thing where you had to try to solve a problem, and you were put under a lot of pressure by people around you. I can't remember exactly what's used in the troubled teen industry, but they've got an equivalent. It's effectively the same thing, just a slightly different exercise. There's something called the red and black game, which was used in LifeSpring, was used in the troubled teen industry, except Some of them because they're, incredibly creative. Some of them call it the black and red game, just to switch things up a little bit. So there was specific terminology like grungy was used. The use of assistance was, the same. The inability to challenge anything, the whole idea of sharing personal experiences and taking responsibility for them. Regression exercises are very common. So getting people to focus on childhood memories, interactions with your mother or father. So visualization sort of interactions with your mother or father. And those kind of serve a dual purpose because number one, they can be very stressful for a lot of people. And, in our seminar, we're asked to kind of confront our mothers and fathers about something challenging that had happened in our lives. And I'm fortunate to have a wonderful relationship with my parents. I don't have any issues that I could take them up on. I don't know if it's the same in the other direction. They may have things they might want to chat to me about, but I didn't really have any issue with that. But there were certainly people around me that were finding that very difficult, a lot of tears, that kind of thing. So it generates stress, which I think many of these exercises are designed to do. But the other thing is that regression brings people down into a childlike state. And when you are in a childlike state, you are far more vulnerable to listen to an authority figure. And this is not, quack psychology. This is Daniel Kahneman thinking fast and slow. This is well-established social psychology in terms of how priming can make people more vulnerable to listening to an authority figure. And obviously, over the course of a training, the leader is establishing himself or herself as more and more of an authority figure and undermining the participants more and more as the training goes on, so that kind of authority gap becomes wider and wider, and it becomes more likely that you're going to outsource your thinking to this person who's leading you. Guided visualization exercises are kind of common in LGATs. So there were a lot of things that were really sort of identical when I started looking at LifeSpring. In terms of EST, they had something called the danger process, where you stand in front of the trainer, and either the trainer or the trainer and the assistants kind of get right in your face and really make you feel quite intimidated, and the whole group sort of looking at you, and they'll point things out about you. And it's, again, psychological stress. So that was something that was used. But even more specifically, there was a song that the guys had to sing. So all the women in at the training were made to go and basically dress up in almost like rubbish bags. So they were supposed to be dressing up as sort of like cavemen, and they had to kind of come and do a sort of caveman sort of show. And all the men were given dresses and makeup, and we had to kind of go and do a show pretending to be a little girl. And there was a very specific song that we were asked to sing, and the lyrics of the song was something like 10 little fingers, 10 little toes, long curly hair and a turned nose, something, and a cute little figure. Watch out, guys, when I get bigger. Or some rhyme like that. And I was like, it was supposed to be humiliating for both groups. That was in my view, the point of it. They may argue that the point was that, embarrassment is self-inflicted and, something like that.
It's your interpretation of the events. It's not actually what happened.
Exactly. So the purported purposes of each of the exercises, I believe, were not the real reason that they're being done. But I was reading a book called The Book of Est, which was first written 1976, and this is essentially just a description of what took place during the EST training. And I can't remember what page it is, but essentially exactly the same song, literally word for word, identical song in a book that was written in 1976 in the US. I'm in Durban, South Africa in 2010, and I'm singing the same song. So these seminars are highly scripted, so they can be replicated relatively easily. And this is why you get these break-off groups and these reformations of groups. So LifeSpring doesn't exist anymore, but now you've got...
I mean, doesn't it?
well, that's exactly it. So you've got like mastery and transformational training in Los Angeles, which appears to just be LifeSpring with a new name. There are a number of other organizations that are using very much the same processes. And I think that LifeSpring is the most replicated of these organizations because it doesn't exist in its original form. So it can't really take anyone to task for kind of stealing its technology. Not that it's came up with its technology on its own, you know?
When you're in this training and you're recognizing that some of the outcomes of some of the exercises are resulting in the same experiences that you have with your diagnosis, are you then thinking to yourself, I'm going to look further into this? Or is it something that you experience and then a few days later or weeks or months, you think, wow, what actually happened there? And maybe I should look into it a bit more.
Well, while I was doing it, I mean, I was excited about the company that I was working at. They seemed very dynamic. They seemed different. They seemed not as corporate-y as other places. And so I was not incentivized to think that this was a problematic thing that I was going through. I had a home in Johannesburg that I was still trying to pay off. It had taken me a while to find this position in Durban. So I didn't want to acknowledge that there was a problem with it, but it was so disturbing to me. I just couldn't believe that this was being done to people that I set up a meeting with the chairman. I tried to have a conversation with him reasonably about it. And, I can only describe him as a true believer. It was wow. Bizarre having the conversation with him. I mean, I said to him, this trainer was just incredibly abusive and nasty. And he'd said, no, he's got the biggest heart in the world and he's a lovely person and whatever. And I was kind of like, well, okay. And when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to change his mind about it, I resigned and immediately wrote as long a document as I could in terms of just trying to remember exactly what had happened. So I spent a lot of time, I think I wrote like a 35-page document just from what I could remember in terms of this happened and this happened and this happened. And I was quite determined to try to make some sense of it. And I didn't know anything about it at the time. I didn't know anything about cults. I didn't know anything about, supposed brainwashing, whatever. I literally went onto Google and I typed in brainwashing, and that's where I started. I was as clueless as anyone when I kind of started looking into it. And for the next 3 years, I spent a lot of time reading about other people's experiences, reading that they'd gone through similar things. And I think that motivated me as well. It just seemed like a lot of people were hurt by participating, and they didn't seem to have a voice either. So it was a lot of people on anonymous discussion forums very worried that they would be harassed by the organizations if they said anything. And it was really difficult to see that was going on. And I also, and I think a lot of people maybe feel that that I felt like I didn't do enough when I was in the training. So I was certainly a person that was resisting probably more than anyone, but I didn't stop it from happening. And there were people that really were going through difficult things, and I felt quite guilty about that. So I think that maybe that was part of the motivation to look into it more. Eventually, by 2013, I felt like I really wanted to find out more about it. So I decided to actually go back to university. So I'd never studied psychology before, but I went back and I kind of started from scratch with a psychology degree. And I just did that until I'd completed my PhD. So my master's was kind of the first attempt at trying to make sense of what goes on in the trainings. And I think my ideas have evolved quite a lot since then. And then the PhD it wasn't just a description of what was going on, but it was also a theory to maybe explain what was going on. And that was based on my experience of bipolar disorder. And I think that I have a theory that explains both the positive effects of participation. When I say positive, inverted commas, because I don't see hypomania or that experience of elevated mood is not a good thing to push onto people without a lot of control in it. But I think my theory explains both the positive effects and a lot of the reported negative effects that have been kind of quite consistently reported over the last 50 years. So claims of psychosis, claims of kind of manic symptoms, claims of depression, there've been claims of suicide, mood instability. And obviously this is not happening all the time, but there've been consistent sort of claims of these things going on. And for the last 50 years, LGATs have kind of been able to say, well, there's no link between what goes on in our trainings and these effects. Whereas I believe that there is actually a very plausible explanation that explains how they're generating their positive states in participants and how they're generating and why there are very specific sorts of casualties, I think is maybe the best way of explaining it.
That's why this research and work is so incredible. It's really the only type of its kind, the only kind of its type. And I think because of how litigious so many of the large group awareness training groups are, it's difficult to have a discussion with individuals who have had those first-hand experiences on the show, like I would perhaps with other individuals who have been in other groups where the same tactics and methods have been used against them to generate a particular outcome that favors leadership over the individuals participating in those groups. So that's why I've been really looking forward to this conversation today. And also because of my passion around the troubled teen industry and the parallels between some of these LGATs that you explore in your research and some of the troubled teen facilities that have been, or programs that have been explored on this show, it can't be that they are not directly copying LifeSpring. For example, 2 or 3 troubled teen programs come to mind when you look at how you outlie LifeSpring and then you look at these troubled teen programs. So that's been another thing that I just haven't been able to let go of. It's like it once you connect the dots, or once the dots are connected for you, it just cements so many things and everything just seems to come together.
Well, the link with the troubled teen industry, so it was strange. So when I was originally looking into these seminars, I did see a sort of documentary type thing on YouTube on CEDU. But I didn't really know what it was. I mean, it's based in the US, but I could tell immediately that they were being put through large group awareness trainings. That was part of the thing that was kind of going on. But it wasn't a major area of my focus. And my understanding was that it was just adults who were, willingly, and I say willingly, with the caveat that they weren't given full information about what takes place, but adults that are willingly taking part in these trainings, not teenagers, and particularly not teenagers who may be experiencing psychological problems, and there's probably a higher rate of psychological problems in these facilities. So that's kind of terrifying. So, at some of the larger LGATs, they do have screening processes. I personally don't think that the screening processes are sufficient. But they do say, for example, if you've got bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or if you're on antidepressant medication, so all of the things that, I think are related to participation, bipolar disorder, psychosis, that kind of thing, they say, please don't take part. But if you're dealing with people that are younger than 18, the median age of diagnosis for bipolar disorder is probably, 23, 24, 25. There are a lot of people that haven't been diagnosed with depression or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or some sort of psychotic disorder or whatever it is by the time that they 15, 16, 17, which is when a lot of these kids are going to these programs. So they are using processes that I don't think should be used on adults, on people whose brains haven't fully developed yet and who may be particularly vulnerable. And as far as I can tell, in terms of the research that I've done, there's no peer-reviewed evidence that these programs are effective in dealing with any of the things that these kids are being sent to these programs for. So it really doesn't make any sense. There seems to be an incredibly big downside to it and no upside. To kind of just circle back to the link between LifeSpring and these seminars. So I know that Robert Litchfield was the founder of the WASP programs. Then one of the people that was running the WASP seminars, or an organization called Resource Realizations that was offering the seminars at these WASP schools, was somebody named David Gilcrease, and he was a LifeSpring trainer. So that relationship's not unknown. It's very clear. And I think that's highly problematic as well, because LifeSpring did have a history of a number of lawsuits, a number of payouts for personal injury, for participants who'd been harmed through participation. So it doesn't seem like a great idea to take that model, and it does seem like a lot of the same exercises are being used, a lot of the same things are being done, and then apply it to vulnerable teenagers.
That is the end of part 2 of this mini-series on large group awareness trainings. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I am your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.